welcome to a special on the Request Playhouse here on the Z Channel. We're going to be seeing in a few minutes one of the most widely requested shows ever on Z, The Exorcist, a popular, controversial, and horrifying film. And our guest tonight is the director of the film, William Friedkin. His past films have included Good Times with Sonny and Cher, The Birthday Party, Night They Raided Minsky's, Boys in the Band. He won an Academy Award for The French Connection, and The Exorcist is what we're seeing tonight and discussing tonight. Bill Friedkin, thanks for joining us here. First, I would like to start off with attitudes. Do you think The Exorcist could be made in 1979?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I don't think that The Exorcist has dated at all, and I think if it were going to be undertaken by anyone, it would be made exactly the same way today, with no changes and as graphically as it's depicted. Or perhaps someone would undertake to do it and not make it as graphically, but I don't think there'd be any problem about making it today. Matter of fact, I think its attitudes are more receptive toward it.
You think? One of the things you touched on there was how it was presented, the literalness of the exorcism and the possession that the story is about is the most striking element. There's never really a series of red herrings that you would expect leading up to, is this a real possession or is this fakery? How did you choose to present that?
The Exorcist is based on a true story, a case that took place in the Washington area, actually in Silver Springs, Maryland, in 1948 or 1949. It was a case of the possession of a 14-year-old boy. That case was widely reported in the newspapers of that day, especially the Washington Post, which did a series of long, lengthy articles about that case of possession. Bill Blatty, the creator of The Exorcist, was an undergraduate at Georgetown University in that area when this case took place. And not only did he read the newspaper articles at the time, but he later had access to a lot of very confidential material in the archives at Georgetown University, which I also saw many years later, having to do not only with the diaries of the actual exorcist, but of doctors and nurses who were in attendance when this bizarre story occurred. And Bill Blatty worked for the better part of 20 years formulating the novel that became The Exorcist. It was, as I say, based on a true story. And the details in the actual case are every bit as mystifying and exciting and bizarre as what Bill so brilliantly recreated in his novel and in his film script. So there was no reason to hulk it up, you know, as they did, for example, with the so-called sequel to The Exorcist, which is nothing but hokum. The Exorcist itself is based on a true but highly puzzling occurrence. So it had to be presented as realistically as possible.
Right. The novel, it has been said that the film The Exorcist has taken the more exploitive elements of the novel and left out maybe some of the meatier aspects. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Who said that? First, let's talk about who said it.
Okay, it has been said in some reviews.
By who?
Film critics.
Which one?
Okay, I don't have specifics with me, but that has been said.
I've never heard that. Let's put it that way. My attitude about the book was it was a great classic work of literature. I believe that The Exorcist will be, the novel, will be regarded years from now as the works of Edgar Allan Poe are regarded today. Edgar Allan Poe never had any commercial success, nor did he ever even get good reviews in his day. Right. Bill Blatty was fortunate to get both with his marvelous novel, The Exorcist. But there are a lot of people, because of its popularity, who would, out of sour grapes, find a number of reasons to say this is wrong with it, or that's wrong with it, or the film is exploitive, or whatever. That's possible. But my attitude about making the film, and having worked with the author of the novel who wrote the screenplay for me, was to render it as faithfully as possible to take what Mr. Blatty had created and to dramatize what I felt was his magnificent novel as faithfully as possible. And I think that Bill and I may have had some disagreements from time to time about what should be kept and what had to be left out. I always prevailed in those disagreements because I was the director. But I think you'll find that Mr. Blatty, to pretty much the same extent as me, feels that the film is the book.
Right, that was a point I was going to bring up, is was there a difference in your vision and his vision? You were to bring this to the screen.
Not really. Bill did write a screenplay, which he gave me. Bill hired me to direct the film, not Warner Brothers, but
right.
Bill Blatty. I was his choice to direct the picture. And he had written a screenplay, which he presented to me after he had hired me. I didn't care for Bill's original screenplay. I thought that it was not a faithful rendering of his novel. I thought that he did take it far afield. That was just my opinion. It wasn't his. But what I did with Bill was to get him to start all over again from scratch and tell the story in the script as he had told it in the novel. We went back and as I think he would tell you, became more faithful to the novel than he did in his first draft screenplay before he ever called on me to direct it. There were certain things that I would at this time call minor disagreements that we had about what should be left out. Whenever they came up, both of us had a full airing of our disagreements, and I always prevailed because Bill was not a neophyte to this business. He knows that the director, who is calling the shots on the floor and with the actors and in the cutting room, has got to go his way. The initial decision that Bill made to hire me was to put his faith in me. And though we disagreed on a few things, he allowed me to prevail.
Now, in your job as a director, in bringing the characters to life, the casting was very interesting. It was a big budget film. You could have gone with name stars and the like. And for the most part, they were relatively unfamiliar faces. How did you go about casting the parts?
Well, we had to find a 12-year-old girl to play Reagan.
That must have been one
There
of the
was
most
nobody around that you could say, well, she'd be good, you know. We auditioned over 500 girls. I stopped counting after 500. And Linda Blair got the part for one reason only, her incredible intelligence and sensitivity. She was the brightest and most sensitive young girl that I've ever known, and easy to deal with, and she completely understood all the ramifications of this material at her age at that time. And she was an A student, an honor student, and a fine horsewoman at her age. She was a prize-winning horsewoman. So she was totally pulled together, and I felt that she wouldn't suffer any psychic repercussions as a result of making the film. In the case of Ellen Burstyn, the studio wanted any number of major stars to play her part. But Ellen Burstyn called me when she had heard I was going to direct The Exorcist. She called and said she wanted to be in it. Would I come and meet with her? I did. I met with her. Again, I found her sensitive and intelligent, and someone who had a complete grasp of what the story was about. And so I didn't want a star. I wanted Ellen Burstyn.
Right.
Max von Sydow was always our first choice for Father Merrin.
Perfect.
He has always, in the films he made with Ingmar Bergman at least, represented a certain strength of character and moral strength, which he brings with him to almost everything he does. Except he left it home when he did the sequel, the so-called sequel to The Exorcist, with the hairy tick or whatever they
which we'll get into a little later.
But Jack McGowran was may he rest in peace, was my first choice to play Burke Dennings, the director. He was a brilliant but little-known actor from the Irish theater, primarily.
Jason Miller.
Jason Miller. That's the subject of another interview. That's such a long story of how we got onto him. I wanted an unknown for that part. I didn't want any one of the several names that were proposed or who had proposed themselves. I believe that that the man who came on wearing the priest's collar performing this exorcism had to be an actor that was completely acceptable to the audience as a priest. And I really didn't want a character whose private life might in any way overshadow his believability. But then the story of how I came on Jason is so convoluted and strange that it's, you know,
a whole show in itself.
He had never done a film before. He was a playwright.
Yeah, more known for Our Winning Season.
He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of a play called That Championship Season.
Right.
And he had done some off-Broadway acting, very little, no screen acting at all. And I had seen his play in New York, to make a long story short, and the play was very powerful, moved me. I then met the author and saw in him the physical characteristics of Father Garris. It then turned out that Jason had at one time studied for the priesthood, had gone to Catholic University, and was trained as a Jesuit. So all of those things began to add up. I did a screen test with him and liked it, and he got the part. Lee J. Cobb was always my choice for Kinderman.
The film is horrifying regardless of your philosophical beliefs. Even the staunchest atheist will go in and be frightened by The Exorcist. What universal chord do you think it strikes, and why?
The Exorcist happens to be a great story. That's where it begins and ends. I mean, we could go into a lot of stuff and get into a lot of pseudo-scientific hogwash about why it has this power. The reason it has this power is because Bill Blatty wrote a wonderful story that is timeless. It compares in its way with Gone with the Wind, which is not a horror story. But why do people respond to that? You know, today. It's very corny. It's not very believable to me today to see that movie. A lot of the effects in it, you can see the seams showing, but it still works as a great and lasting romance. And that's because its narrative line is so brilliantly wrought. And because the characters are strong and believable, and it's constantly surprising, and you care about the people. These are all the elements and properties of good storytelling.
What do you feel you brought to that? I know there are a lot of
techniques. A faithful adaptation. That's all I brought to it. As faithful a translation to the screen or adaptation, if you want to call it that, that's what I brought to it. I respected it. I felt at the time I read it that it was a powerful story that had certain obvious depths that went beyond, and depths and implications that went beyond the surface narrative. And I tried to preserve those depths. But I didn't alter the story in any way because it was so powerful.
Do you think the power lies in its dealing with faith? There are horror movies that aren't nearly as horrifying as something like The Exorcist because it deals with things that are inside of all of us.
The Exorcist is about the mystery of faith. If you ask me to put in one sentence, what is this film about, that's what it's about. The mystery of faith. And faith that is tested in a confrontation between forces of good and evil, in both an abstract and in a realistic physical way. And The Exorcist, as a story, I'm not talking about the film now because I happen to direct the film, I'm talking about the story. If the story is a powerful and uplifting one, and in its way, you know, it has the power of many stories in the Bible. And you know, Bill Blatty is a deeply religious man, and his religion and his beliefs transcended his powers as a writer.
We're fast running out of time. I'm getting signals, and there's one thing I do want to touch on. The sequel of The Exorcist, The Heretic, which we're also showing on Z this week. I'm sure you and Mr. Blatty were offered a deal to become a part of a sequel because of the obvious success of The Exorcist. Why did you choose not to, and what do you feel?
Well, I felt that The Exorcist was totally complete in itself, and to do a sequel was just, you know, would just be done for commercial purposes and no other. The so-called sequel, the Hairy Tick, or whatever they refer to it as, to me it's an abomination. not because it's a bad movie, which it is, a bad movie, wrought by people who are, in my opinion, fourth and fifth-rate intellects. But what they attempted to do was to trash the original material. Rather than to take a story and try to do a story that utilized some of the same strengths of The Exorcist, all they did was take the title and the logotype and some of the characters and trash them. To me, that film, if it can be called a film, it's an abomination, and I think this channel, you know, ought to be ashamed of itself for running it. But to me, it would be the equivalent of someone taking a novel by Tolstoy or Charles Dickens, taking the title and the characters and coming up with a porno musical. I mean, I've seen works of pornography that have more integrity than that picture.
Okay, well, no punches pulled on our show here today, and we want to thank our guest, William Friedkin, for being with us and sharing his point of view with us. I can't believe the time is gone already. There's a lot more we would have liked to discuss, but that's the way it goes. So please stay tuned for The Exorcist, one of the most horrifying films of our time, and controversial as well. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure, thank you.